Let's start with this quote. In a really famous 1983 documentary called Style Wars, a young graffiti artist from New York, a kid named Scheme, he just laid his mission out there. He wasn't just painting. Nope. He was out to bomb, destroy all lines.
But here's the thing. Sitting right there next to him is his mom, and she is just completely baffled. Her reaction, what have the lines ever done to him? It just perfectly captures this huge gap, right? You've got a new generation creating this whole new culture and a world that just doesn't get it. This was way more than a generation gap. It was a clash of worlds, and it was happening right in their living room.
And then the story takes this really fascinating kind of wild turn. The same teenager who saw subway cars as something to be bombed with art, he grows up and enlists in the US Army. He literally went from fighting a symbolic war against the city's lines to serving in a real one. So how does that happen? How does a graffiti writer become a soldier? Well, that strange journey is exactly what this explainer is all about. We're going to unpack how the fight against spray paint in New York City kind of became a training ground for tactics that would end up redefining both policing and warfare in our cities today. Okay, so let's dive in by taking a closer look at Scheme's story. I mean, he's the perfect bridge between these two worlds that feel like they're miles apart. You know? The super vibrant, chaotic art scene of the South Bronx and the rigid, disciplined structure of the military. So this is really the central question we have to ask. Is this just one guy's weird career choice, a fluke, or does his journey actually reveal something deeper, maybe something a little more troubling, about the connection between how we control our cities and how we fight our wars? To really get this, we've got to go back to the moment this whole culture just exploded onto the world stage. And lucky for us, it was all captured in one absolutely iconic film. You have to understand, Style Wars wasn't just a movie. It was like a cultural document. It took you right inside the world of these graffiti writers, the breakdancers, the rappers. It showed this incredible creative energy that was just bursting out of the city's most neglected neighborhoods. And this, wow, this just shows you the sheer scale of their ambition. Now, this piece is from years later in LA by an artist named Saber, and it shows you how the art form evolved. We're not talking about small tags here. These artists were transforming huge pieces of public infrastructure into these stunning, albeit illegal, works of art. But, and this is a big but, city officials and a lot of the public, they didn't see art. They saw vandalism. They saw chaos. They saw a city that was spinning out of control. And their response was framed in the absolute strongest terms possible. Now pay attention to the language here. They didn't call for a cleanup or a beautification project. Right from the very beginning, this was framed as a war. And using a metaphor like that has real consequences, right? It creates an enemy that has to be defeated, not a social issue you need to understand. And this war was fought with a very real arsenal. Mayor Ed Koch threw tons of money into these aggressive countermeasures. They came up with chemical washes to just strip the paint right off. They had police dogs patrolling the subway yards, and they basically fortified them like military bases. And here you can see the reality of that war. That's razor wire. I mean, this is a technology designed for battlefields and prisons, and now it's wrapped all around the city's subway yards. The tools of state control were being turned inward, right in the heart of New York City, against a bunch of teenage artists. So, you've got military-grade fencing, police dogs, the language of combat. This whole escalation, it brings us to the core argument of our source material, which asks a really provocative question. What if this wasn't just a metaphor? I mean, what if fighting graffiti artists actually helped develop and normalize a whole new way of thinking about controlling city populations? A way that kind of blurred the line between policing a city and occupying a territory. And this brings us to this big idea called the new military urbanism. Basically, it's the theory that our cities are increasingly being seen and treated as battle spaces. Military thinking, military tech, military strategies, they're all bleeding into domestic policy, and it's changing how authorities see and manage the very places we live. So here's where it all connects. The war on graffiti, it wasn't some isolated thing. You could almost see it as an early chapter in this much bigger story, a kind of laboratory where these strategies for urban control were being tested and fine-tuned. I mean, when you really break it down, The tactics used against these graffiti writers look shockingly like a real military campaign. You've got new weaponry, like chemical washes and surveillance. You've got intelligence operations to track artists, propaganda campaigns, and yeah, a whole industry that popped up to make money off the conflict.
And this right here, this is where the feedback loop becomes crystal clear. Years after police were allegedly crossing out graffiti in New York to create fights between artists, here we see the US military using the exact same tactic as a psychological operation in Iraq. The strategies that were tested on city streets were now being deployed in an active war zone. It's pretty incredible.
And remember that last strategy, profiting from the conflict? Well, that leads us directly to this. The contract to erase or buff this massive piece on the LA River, it was given to a commercial division of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The war created a multi-million-dollar industry, blurring the lines between the military, the government, and private companies, all in the name of controlling the urban landscape.
So what's the ultimate legacy of this whole thing? After decades of conflict, what are we left with? Well, it's about a lot more than just having clean subway cars. It's about a fundamental shift in how we look at our cities and who gets to leave their mark on them.
Because, in the end, the war on graffiti did something way bigger than just clean trains. It helped sell this idea that any sign of visible disorder, even something as simple as a spray-painted name, isn't just an eyesore. No, it's a security threat. It's a vulnerability that signals a loss of control, and it has to be neutralized at all costs. So you have these two totally opposing views, right? On one side, for the writer, it's all about self-expression, about creating this shared visual space, a city in common. But seen through the lens of military urbanism, that exact same act is read as a sign of weakness, an opening for chaos that has to be secured and controlled.
And that really leaves us with a final question to think about. When we start treating every unsanctioned mark as a threat, and every public wall as a potential battleground that needs to be managed and controlled, sure, we might get a certain kind of order, but what voices do we end up silencing? And what really happens to the soul of a city when its walls are no longer allowed to speak?